Welcome back to SmarterUmedia, the only place on the internet you're guaranteed to get smarter in 2 minutes. We are excited to have Alanna Hirshman, who is one of the great assistant professors at the Rawls College of Business, joining us. She has studied all kinds of things that we're going to dig into. Without further ado, Alanna, welcome to SmarterU.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. A lot of the times, as assistant professors, we do a lot of things behind the curtain. So it's nice to have an opportunity to kind of share some of our findings.
All right,
Yeah.
we're going to give you 2 minutes. We're going to take our fabulous chicken timer, who keeps us all running on track. I'm going to add 2 minutes to it, and Alanna Hirshman, make us just a little bit smarter.
Absolutely. So thank you again. I am an assistant professor of strategic management, and for far too long, strategic management has primarily focused on explaining firms' financial performance. While this body of research has really provided insights that have helped firms gain and sustain competitive advantage, the tunnel vision on financial performance has resulted in many firms cutting corners to reach the top. As a result, a lot of companies, and this has been shown in media articles, have increased their wrongdoing behaviors. For example, Wells Fargo defrauded clients, Volkswagen rigged emissions for emission scandals. Other firms are starting to use corporate social responsibility as a facade. So, for example, McDonald's switching to paper straws, but they're not really recyclable. And then starting to navigate these ambiguous decisions, so this gray area between what's legal and what's ethical. Since the pressure to generate a return for shareholders often comes at the expense of stakeholders, there is a dire push for strategic management research and practitioners to shift from being just money-minded to also morally minded. Therefore, I use my research to really respond to a charge given to the field and to practice, which is to study and improve what we call corporate conscience. I personally define corporate conscience as a company's awareness and commitment to engaging in ethical practices that prioritize the well-being of all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Primarily, my research focuses on companies that have engaged in wrongdoing and how they can kind of turn around from that, but also how companies can engage in corporate social responsibility to build goodwill and trust with their shareholders as well as their stakeholders. So I have a few things written down that go into details here. But for me, my big call here is I want to discuss the difference between ethical and legal. So that's what I hope to dig into a little bit more today.
Perfect timing, just when you start getting talked to by the chicken, clucking away over there. Uh,
Absolutely.
oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you for giving us that. We always tell our audience that life is busy. If they need to
Yeah.
go off after taking their nugget, make sure you share it with people and get them to talk about this with you. Corporate conscience is a
Yes.
great place to start. But we're going to talk. You're going to want to stick around because Alanna is going to help us unpack what that means for all of us. And I think you just hit such a big bell that we should let it resonate for a minute. I think it's important to just imbibe what you said, which just is what a broader question perhaps underlying all of this. The broader question is, what are businesses?
Yeah.
What are we trying to do? Isn't that at the base of your broader question?
Absolutely. That is primarily the base of my question. So, what I just talked about for those 2 minutes recently stemmed from a conversation that I had with one of the more senior faculty at Texas Tech, Dr. Ron Mitchell. And I had a conversation discussing the research that I do. And he's like, well, I think what you really study, because for a long time I justified what I studied as ethical decisions. And I do believe that that is part of what I study, but it's much deeper than that. It is
Yeah.
the corporate conscience and understanding what the question you just posed, which is what really is the purpose of business? Like, why do we engage in it? And I'm a Christian. And so it's funny enough that yesterday I was reading my Bible, and part of the commentary on the part I read was engaging in business is good. Like, that is a good thing. Like, we are called to work and engage in business. However, we have to do it in such a way that we don't fall into this sin and temptation to take advantage of others. So for me, I think that it resonates for me on like a personal and a professional level that business is something that we should do. Like it helps build society into what it is, but to what extent is business or the drive and the, we'll say, facade of going after being money minded really corrupting that morally minded side of us?
Well, you really, and I think you encapsulated it, whether it's a moral stance or belief that you have from a faith perspective,
Yeah,
or whether you have just a belief that you don't want to wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and not
yeah,
like yourself.
absolutely.
Those two things should motivate you. And I tell people who find me because I've been an entrepreneur and things have worked in my world, they come and sort of ask questions. I always make sure to suggest that before they start, they ask themselves the question, what are you going to do when someone comes to you and asks you to do something you're not comfortable with? Because it will happen. And if you don't think about it until then, you're in trouble.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. And that's something that I actually teach my students as well. So, one of the chapters in the textbook that we talk about is business ethics. And I actually had an individual reach out to me who was very seasoned. And he basically opened up and shared his story with me of how he was in that situation, where he was a CFO of a company. And he said, I was put in the situation where my CEO looked at me and said, look, we made promises to our shareholders and our investors, and we just came short. I need you to cook the books. And in the moment, that individual had a decision to make, and he decided to do it. He cooked the books, and it kind of set on his conscience for about not that long, actually, very short, because
Yeah.
within the next year, he quit. And then unfortunately, 6 years later, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately because, the truth came through. 6 years later, it was found out that the books were cooked and this individual did go to jail for his wrongdoing. And I use that as an example for the students that I teach to tell them, there's going to come a time, even if you don't think there's going to come a time will most likely come that you are put in a situation that it's kind of the color of my shirt. It's the gray area, right? Like
Yeah.
you're like, I don't know what to do in this situation. And in those moments, individuals are very vulnerable to these sense giving behaviors. If somebody else tells you to do something, you are open to a rationalization that can justify your actions as being wrong. And I'm also the oldest of four sisters, and one of my younger sisters is going to college. And before she went, I told her, I said, the one thing I ask of you is before you go, that you create a set of values for yourself. I said, it doesn't have to match my values. It just has to be true to you. And I need you to do this because there's going to come a time when somebody asks you to do something that you might not be comfortable with, whether it's personal or professional. And at that point, I need you to have that list in your mind where you can check, is this in line with who I am and who I want to be? And if it is, awesome. And if it's not, then you know to say no. But I think what you just said is such a key that before entrepreneurs start a business, before employees work at a company, they need to have clear ethical expectations and a clear understanding that ethical and legal don't equal each other.
Yes, that is absolutely a perfect distinction. I mean, legal matters too, right? So,
Absolutely.
so you want to be very much aware, compliance, all those sorts of things are there
Yes.
for a reason. But if you're asked to do something you feel like it's legal, but it's just wrong,
Right.
you need to know what to do with that. I'll give a personal example. And
Yeah.
this is the one that I give to people. So, running a public company, you go and you do investor presentations where you give a presentation of what's going on that fits within all of the SEC guidelines. And then there are 20-minute meetings back to back that are scheduled after that, where you sit down with large companies that are investor concerns.
Mhm.
And in those rooms, it shocked me over and over again how many times essentially we were being asked for non-public information, something that's
Right.
illegal and
Exactly.
certainly not right. So they would say, well, okay, we heard what you said, but now what about this? I said, well, you don't want me to give you non-public information for you to trade on. But that's one of those things. I have a law degree. I knew very well where those lines
Mhm.
were, but I bet you most of those rooms, that's not the way that conversation goes down. But it's an
Right.
example of the kind of thing that it's sort of everybody's doing it.
Right.
And that's still, that's the stuff where the pressure gets big. It's the everybody's doing it. That's not the question.
Exactly. And that's such a good point because this morning when I was kind of looking through a few things, I looked at the definition of business ethics that is written in the textbook that I teach the students with. And it says it's an agreed upon code of conduct in business based on social norms. And to me, I raise an eyebrow at that because I'm like, what have we allowed these norms to come to? And I think that what
Okay.
you just brought up is such a good point because it's the saying, everybody does it. And I think that it honestly rolls back to a question that I answered on my GRE, which I remember getting this written question on my GRE was is do you always follow the authority and the person in charge? And if things are going ethically correct and they're following the legal guidelines, then sure, but you have to think about some real anomaly of examples here where you just always shouldn't do that because sometimes in the situation that you just posed, it might appear to be the norm and people might say this is what you can expect, everybody's doing it, but it doesn't mean it's right. And I think that being able to differentiate what's truly right from even if 99 people are doing it and you're the only one that sees that it's not right, we should still kind of take a stand and make sure that we're doing what we as individuals are comfortable with and it upholds our values.
I think you're 100% right. And I think there are three distinct levels that this impacts our world, right? One of them is just personal, the thing I said
Yep.
before. It's, I don't want to wake up in the morning and look in the mirror. So if I'm someone who lies and I do that, and I'm not saying there's no human that's not going to lie at some point.
Yep.
That's no way.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, if it's a lot easier to do the 100th time than it is the first time. And if I'm that person
Yep.
who's lying and doing all of that, I'm going to look in the mirror and I'm going to not like the guy. I'm not going to like the liar who's looking back at me.
Mm-hmm.
That's personal. In a company, honestly, it is very, if we are creating a culture of deceit, I feel as if that's poison. It's the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
You've just invited cancer into your organization. How you're interacting with each other is going to be affected by that because that's what we've decided. And believe me, every day we go to work
Mm-hmm.
with those people. So it's that. And then outwardly facing, I feel as if there's anything you have
Yep.
as someone in business, you have your integrity. You
Yeah.
have the ability to be someone wants to do work with because they know they can trust you. All three of those levels are so critical to our being. Isn't that all what you find wrapped up into what you try to imbue and teach to your students?
It's so crazy to me that you talked about three levels because again, that was kind of my mindset going into this is you have your personal level that is the individual, the decisions that you make and that only you can control. Which also is just a side note. I do tell my students at the end of the day, there is only one thing in this life that you can control. One thing, and that's your decisions. Your
Yeah.
decisions on what to speak, how to act, but that's the only thing you can control. So I really think it's so awesome that you started with that personal level. And then I do think that that kind of trickles up to the firm level and what are the expectations, the norms set in that. And then, like you said, I think there is that third level, which is just the societal norms. Like we've gotten so used to, this being the motivating factor or the idea of success that we forget about all the other things. And I really truly agree with that. And it will trickle into the recommendations that come later. But I fully agree with that. And something else that you said that really sparked something inside of me is if you lie once, you can eventually lie 100 times. And when I was an undergraduate student, my business ethics professor, Captain O, he was the one who initially triggered this interest in ethics for me. So all glory to God and credit to him for doing that, because
Here,
there's a
here.
lot of stuff that he kind of brought to the surface that I didn't know what was happening. And one of the things he did is he had us write a paper on what is something small that you've done that is unethical. And I remember somebody in my class talked about, well, how many of you go to a fast food restaurant and you grab an extra stack of napkins or like 15 different sauces that you don't need? And
Mm,
he's like, that's such a small thing, but you rationalize it. You're like, well, they're a big company. They don't need the extra sauce or the extra napkins.
right.
But then day by day, that little thing turns into you rationalizing something bigger. And then you get the ability to go into a company as a lower level employee and you rationalize something there. And then you become a middle manager and then a top manager. And then maybe you start your own company. And each step of the way, these little rationalizations for, well, I'm doing this because of X. And you have this justification, it can build up. And that's when I also talk to my students about lying, like what you just said about, telling a lie. Everybody's told a lie. But I tell them, I'm like, if you realize you're telling a lie, that is your self admission that what you did is wrong. And I was like, I remember the first time that was brought to me, and I was like, wow, that's deep. Because it's like, if you have to lie to somebody else, that's you admitting that you can't admit what you did to somebody, that
Yeah.
you are internally admitting what you did was you're not happy with. So I guess wrong might be the wrong way to phrase it, but maybe it's that you're not satisfied with. And for me, it starts at an everyday level and then it just grows, because if you tell one lie and you're okay with it, you tell a second one, you're okay with it. By the time you get to 100, it's become that norm.
Yeah, it is. It's become you.
Right.
And that's a thing. I mean, there's an old expression that is show me who your friends are and I'll show you who you will be. And
Yes.
the equivalent of that is the people you're surrounded by really do become who you'll be, whether you like it or not. And
Yep.
so that's a big deal. You teach these things. So I feel like getting those three levels lead into now how do we interact with the world? So you talk about how the social norms have evolved. You started by giving very specific examples of
Mm-hmm.
places where it spun, quote, out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And those are just the ones we know about.
Right.
So, how at these three levels do we interact with that world realistically, right? Because we're in an abstract place. We're having a conversation that is about those things. But when the rubber meets the road, that's
Mm-hmm.
where we sort of have to live. So let's
Yeah.
start. We've really dealt with personal level, but interactions within a company. How does that rubber hit that road?
Yeah, so I definitely think that it's important, and you noted it, and I talk about it in the class that I teach, is when a company is founded or when a new leader takes over, it's very important to set clear expectations day one. Like that's the first thing that we should say. So, for example, using my class as a somewhat of a analogy for a company, we can say that I am technically a leader of my class, or analogy wise, a leader of a company. And I have up to 45 students in my courses here that are somewhat of employees that work with me. The first day that I see them, so every first day of class, I go in and I tell them, welcome to, strategic management with Dr. Hirshman. I'm so glad that you all are here. And I set clear expectations. I tell them, how many of you know what a realistic job preview is? And really, they don't know what that is. And I tell them that today they're going to get one. And hopefully, if everything goes well, then my expectations are something that they feel they can meet, they have expectations that they feel I can meet, then we will have an awesome semester. But if the realistic job preview is not something that they're happy with, and they're like, I don't know if I can meet these expectations, or vice versa, then I do say there's other professors that teach this course. Maybe one of them is more fit for you. And I think the same is true within a company, that if you are the leader of a company, you have to draw the lines for the individuals, because lack of an expectation, lack of a boundary provides a rationalization for unethical things to happen. And that's what I communicate to my students, is I tell them, these are going to be the due dates. I have zero tolerance for cheating. I have zero tolerance for lying, zero tolerance for stealing. And that includes intellectual property as well. And they know. And do I have grace with them? Absolutely. I mean, they're still college students, but
Right.
by the time that you get to organizations, still have grace, but be sure that, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. I think I said that wrong. But to me, the clear boundary in organizations and firms is a company needs to set clear expectations. And for example, I worked for a company that did that. So I had an internship as an HR coordinator. And when I was in this role, they had a zero tolerance policy for any type of sexual harassment. It was just zero tolerance. And there's one situation where a young woman heard the camera clicks on a phone of someone else taking pictures of her when she was on a ladder. And she was in a skirt that day. And I can tell you, within a day, the person who clicked that camera was let go of the organization.
Yeah.
There's just a zero tolerance policy. And I think that is the ideal for companies, is say, hey, we don't do this. We're not going to allow this. And you have to stand your ground, because that's the other thing, is if you set these expectations, but then somebody crosses a boundary and you don't hold them accountable, other people are going to break those boundaries too. So to me, that would be my recommendation based on the way that I teach, is set expectations very clear. I also have students sign a contract to self, where they actually have to write out their goals, what they want to learn, what they want to gain, and they have to sign it. And if at any point they're not meeting those goals, I pull that sheet out and I'm like, I didn't sign this. This is what you signed up for.
Right.
You tell me how we can meet your goals.
Right.
And I think really making sure that employees, or in this situation, students, are involved in setting those goals, they're going to be more willing to meet them.
Well, I think that is dead on. The circumstance, if you can get, and it is a beautiful thing when people who are running the place care, and care enough to plan, never perfect, but try to make it work, and really want the healthy environment in a company. Though a lot of us find ourselves in companies where that's not the case.
Right.
So it's us now looking at, and this, I think, in all of these three sort of subgroups we've talked about, they all have a lot of circumstance we'll find ourselves in where we're not the ones who control some of it. But as you said, I can control my decisions.
Yep.
How do I do that? I'm in a company, and that's not the way that is. That's not the culture. What my options are, and they're not always good, because this may be the job I have, and I need to support my family or whatever.
Exactly.
But what do you suggest? That's the hard stuff, right? The hard stuff is that you got a culture that's not great, and you're there, and you feel like you really have to be there. Now, what do you do?
I think that is unfortunately the reality for too many individuals.
100%.
Is that they are in these situations, and you have basic needs that your money and your income have to satisfy. So, your shelter, your food, your clothes, take care of your family, but also, what is it worth? And that is something that again, this professor of mine installed in me is with the little things is lying and again, this is not the scale of a job and taking care of a family, but say that lying gets you an A on a test. Are you telling me that your integrity is just worth that A? That's it? That's all that your name is worth? I do think it's very different when you are in a corporation because, for example, when you have to take care of a family, like I said, I'm the oldest of 4 girls.
Yeah.
When you have mouths to feed, you have to consider certain things. An option that has been studied is the whistleblowing option. And I will tell you, I have studied some whistleblowing situations, and it doesn't always end up the way that it
No,
should end up.
it really doesn't. It sounds
No,
great. It's a system that sounds great, but most systems aren't great.
no, they really aren't. And I've seen things where when these organizational crises happen, so say for example that you're an employee at an organization and you
Hmm.
realize that something unethical is happening, there's some sort of wrongdoing going on. An employee has the legal right to kind of speak up, to go to the authorities and say, hey, I see this is happening. And unfortunately, what happens is that person is often called a liar and saying they don't know what they're talking about. And
Yeah.
yes, there are certain rights and there are certain protections that that person now has, such as they cannot be fired. But realistically, if you just blew a whistle on your organization and everybody knows it, sometimes they don't know it, but they might have suspicion. Why would you still want to work at that organization? So, my big thing with these types of situations is try to be as preventative as possible instead of reactive. Because when you are caught in a reactive situation, as Steve, you were saying, it's a really hard situation. So, for me to be preventative or proactive, I would say if you notice something in your organization is not ethical, um, I personally would try to understand where it's coming from. So is it coming from the top? Is it coming from another employee? If it's not coming from the top, maybe talk to the person at the top and say, hey, this is something I've understood, and come at it from a curiosity perspective. Because I always think that coming at it from a curiosity perspective allows the other person to speak and you can hear what they're saying, and then you can make an internal decision of how is this really going to be handled. I think tattletelling or tattletaling is putting your mark in the ground for your leaders to see. And sometimes that can be really good. Sometimes if they are the ones making these unethical decisions, that could harm you in the long run. So for me, it's always assess first. Assess what's going on. Try to see where other people are standing on this issue. If it's clear that you are the outlier on this issue, I would say look for a new job immediately. That's just, and all of this is just personal recommendations. And based on kind of my values and my beliefs is I would want to belong to an organization that shares
Right.
a similar ethical boundary as me. And if they're
Yeah.
willing to cross lines that I'm not, that's my hint that, hey, keep this job until you find a new one, because you do have life situations such as, putting food on the table that require you to have a paycheck. But I would say if you are in that situation, try to get out as quickly as possible. The other thing is if it does become reactive, if it's to the point that you really have to make a decision, I think that's up to every person and their own values and beliefs. I know for me, I've been in some of those situations where I'm like, is
Yeah.
this really worth it for me? And for me, I'm like, I mean, trust me, when you're in the situation where you look and you're like, it's this paycheck or being ethical, a lot of people will take the paycheck. They will say, this is physical, it's tangible, it's going to help me physically survive. But when you look at the other side and you're just like, if you're ever in a situation where you do something unethical and then you're rewarded later, whenever you accept that, can you really stand up in front of people and accept it with a pure heart? Because if the answer is no, then I wouldn't do this. And crazy enough as it sounds, we were eating in a barbecue restaurant one
Uh-huh.
day, and there was a sign on the wall that said, make the right choice, not the easy one.
Hmm.
And a lot, and I was like, out of all places to get an inspirational quote, the barbecue the
And there's
barbecue
a lot
restaurant
of
had it.
inspiration. This is Texas, okay? I mean, barbecue, it's about the barbecue.
Yes, it
If the
is.
barbecue is not inspiring you, you are not paying attention.
Yes. So I saw that, and that actually has really resonated with me for
Yeah.
probably over a decade, or at least close to a decade at this point. And trust me, it's a hard pill to swallow, because as humans, I think we naturally have a tendency to want to do the least for the most. And it's like, okay, let me just get to the next step and to the next step. But who do you want to be at that next step? Are you willing to sacrifice your name, your word, and your integrity to just get there? And I think it varies by individuals. And it's hard. It's so, so incredibly hard.
Yeah.
But I think it's well worth it. And
And
again, just, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I would also add the positive side of that because I think
Yeah.
oftentimes, sometimes it's harder to be motivated by the the personal things that make us feel. In other words, am I going to feel good about myself? That's a good motivator. On the other
Oh,
hand, sometimes I don't get motivated enough. I would say this simply, and that is there are places with your talents, with people who are going to give you an environment that
yeah.
fosters your being, and it's worth your
Mhm.
finding those places because you just sometimes don't know until you're there. The interview process
Sure.
is so flawed. We go through
Yeah.
it and we think, oh, these people are great because we're all performing at our best. If you find yourself in a place, and as you said, you have to be there while you're supporting yourself and people, look for the places that have
Mhm.
the people that are the way you want to be. That's the best advice I've ever heard.
Yes. No, I completely agree with you. And also, I think you bring up such a good point that interviews are so short.
Mm,
And something that we've always been told is anybody can be anybody for a short amount of time.
yeah.
It's when you get to the long spurts of time where you really see who people truly are and how they behave and the decisions they make. And I think that some good advice is, if somebody is going to interview with a company, um, and this is what I tell my students, is do your research on that company. Understand,
Yeah.
like, and not even just like the people you work with. I'm talking like the whole organization. See if they've had ethical scandals in the past. Understand how they handled it. Understand, if they do have, on the other side of the ethics coin, if they have corporate social responsibility initiatives, do they contribute to charities? Do they allow employee volunteering?
Yeah.
And really do your own assessment. So the way that I kind of prepare my students is, I'm like, really think of yourself as an investigator before an interview, because you're going to have the chance to ask questions, and you want to have good questions to ask. Um, Now, do I think those questions should be curiosity questions? Absolutely. I would probably never recommend somebody to go into an interview and start to interrogate, but you want to have background knowledge. So everything that you are communicated with in an interview, you can verify.
And that exists now. I mean, it hasn't always existed. We think the world's always been this way, but I tell
Right.
you, the amount of information you can find before you sign on the dotted line is
Mhm.
unlike anything in history. So that's great advice to all of us. And it's so easy not to do, right? It's just so
Yeah.
easy to tell yourself, yeah, that's what I ought to do, and not do it. But I would say that's a real help so you don't find yourself there. And if you do, again, sometimes you just don't know till you're there because
Right.
you can't. But if you're there and it's not working, finding some place that really, again, fosters who you are and allows you to
Mhm.
be the person that you're happy looking at the mirror, looking at in the mirror in the morning seems like a worthwhile thing to do.
And that's all we have. Like
Yeah.
when you think about it, like
Yeah.
we came into this world who we are, and we leave with just us. We can't take any of the money or the status with us. It's just, are you, when it comes time for our clock to run out, are you going to be okay with the life you lived?
I think you got straight into the philosophy. This is what I love about Smarter You. I'm going to be honest with you. It's sort of you start out by thinking we're talking about real estate or whatever the thing is. And before you know it, it's all about us. It's
Yeah.
all about the world and the people and how we intersect with each other, because that's all this stuff is. We asked the question earlier on and didn't answer it, but we're going to try to, which is, what is the purpose? What is it
Yeah.
that we're trying to do in business? And I believe politics, business, all of these arenas, we are so far down the line when we're talking about what we talk about day to day. We never get back to the purpose. We never
Right.
get a chance to sort of
Mhm.
say, look, we have business and enterprise because that's the way that we create and allow people to support themselves.
Mhm.
I mean, at a fundamental level, that's really what this is about.
Mhm.
Yet somehow we come to think, oh, it's about some individual, me maybe, or you, or someone else, just making as much as they possibly can to get this stuff. Well, I don't think that's what the fabric of our business society is.
Mhm. No, I agree. And when you were speaking, some thoughts were coming to my mind that many decades ago, research on strategic management really focused on this idea that the purpose of business was to create a return for shareholders,
Hmm.
and to say your job as an organization is that individuals or investment firms came and invested with you. It is your fiduciary duty to create a financial return for them. And I do think that that still holds. Like if you have investors, you do have an obligation to make sure that you're doing everything you can to meet that fiduciary duty. However, after that came about, stakeholder theory was generated, and it's really advanced over the recent decades. And it's talked about that firms not only have a duty to shareholders or investors, but they really have a responsibility to all stakeholders, where stakeholders can be defined as anyone who influences or can be influenced by a firm. So whether that's a consumer, whether that's the general public, whether that's the media, whether that's kids who don't even know what the company is, your company can have a ripple effect on society, how the norms are generated. And I think that that shift is, we're really seeing it in the body of literature that is strategic management. Is there is this mindset saying that a company's primary responsibility is not just to generate these returns anymore, but we have dual responsibilities, and maybe even more than dual, I should say, to not only generate that return, but also make sure that we're doing good, and at the bare minimum, at least not doing harm while trying to reach those goals.
Yeah, I think there should be an understanding 100% that that's the case. The pressures can be different, though. Having sat in that chair,
Right.
when
Absolutely.
you are when you have the quarterly pressure of announcing what your earnings were, what your
Mhm.
financials are, there's a lot that goes with that process. And I
Mhm.
think for people who are successful entrepreneurs, it's one of those conversations. There's nobody out there who sits down with someone who's contemplating going public.
Yeah.
There should be a group that
Yeah.
sits down and says, here is you, do you really want to do that? Because
Yeah.
those pressures are different. And I think there are people who decide not to be in a public arena because they're allowed to do things for more stakeholders, not just for shareholders, at
Mhm.
least in their own minds, right?
I agree with you. And I think as you were speaking, the word humility just came to my mind. It's at some point we're all going to be humbled, and it's who do you want your audience to be when that time
Yeah.
comes? Is it just the private investors, or is it the whole realm of public investors as well as the media that generally comes when you go to IPO? So no, I completely agree with you. And I think that that's something that really should be internally assessed before starting a company, before taking on these pressures, is when the time comes, what is going to win in a battle? Because that's a part of stakeholder theory, is that different stakeholders, they have different levels of pressure that they can and do exert on an organization, an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur. And like you just said, investors usually have the most pressure. They're the ones that are face to face in the boardroom meetings. They're the ones whose money is funding your business, who's putting food on your table. And what does the consumer have to offer? You might lose one customer. Well, if you have a million, that's not a huge thing to lose. Or if you have one and it's $1 million, that might be a little bit bigger to lose. But it's not an equal fight when it comes to attention and pressure. And I think that maybe another way to approach this is to not just make sure that the firm's ethics and expectations are clear, but make sure that the investors are as well.
Yeah, and some of that you can control, some of it you
You can't.
can't. I mean, it is one of those things, and I am a philosopher, philosophy degree, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think what we do in the ivory tower, and I don't say that
Yeah.
disparagingly, but I think it's wildly important because the research and looking into how these things work helps us to apply them. But you oftentimes don't have nearly the control that you'd like
Mm-mm.
to
No.
of the way those things go, which I think gets to those three levels we talked about: the personal, the interpersonal within your company, and then the outward facing.
Yeah.
All of those things evolve over time because you and your company evolve over time.
Right.
And so, how you continue to check in really matters so that you're doing an honest assessment of how those things feel today, how they work and don't work today, and how we may have an opportunity to make it better.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I think that it's just such a conversation that needs to be had. And it is, like we talked about earlier, it really is a gray area. And that's why I think I'm so naturally drawn to study kind of this corporate conscience, is because everybody can have a different opinion. Everybody's can draw their line in the sand a few feet from each other. And there's no inherent right or wrong to that. And I think that that's the natural beauty and also caution when we talk about corporate conscience, is that
Yeah,
it's going to vary. It's going to vary by person, it's going to vary by company, it's going to vary by country, right? Like what we deem as okay and not okay. And I think that something we should always remember is to keep an open mind when talking to people, because there could be certain things that other people view as, no, this is okay, and another person is like, no, it's not. And we have to understand, well, why do you say that? And I think that as humans, we all have natural cognitive biases that inhibit us from
sure.
really truly trying to understand. But the more we can break down those biases, the more open we can be to understand different people's opinions and thoughts on these very sensitive topics.
It's fascinating to me. First of all, you brought up the international, which I want to go to, and we could talk forever. So we won't talk
Yeah.
forever. I promise. We keep going into what I think are continuing fascinating things. But corporate conscience, the term itself is interesting to dissect because corporations don't have a conscience.
Right. Right.
And that's the core of the question. So it's only going to exist or find a way to have an impact because the people who have a conscience within the corporation decide they're going to do that. And the people change, and that can change. It's a
Mhm.
forever it is the Sisyphusian task. We are
Yeah.
rolling the great rock of conscience up the corporate ladder every day, and it is up to us. It's not up to some mythical
Mhm.
corporate thing, because it doesn't have a conscience.
Right. Absolutely. And that, so we, when I started to do research, um, I particularly study a very delicate level, I should say. Typically in management, you study macro or micro, where macro
Right.
is firm level situations and micro are individuals within a firm. And I like to study this meso level that really takes the understandings of individuals and studies kind of these firm outcomes or processes.
Mhm.
And the concept of like personifying an object or an organization can be called anthropomorphism. So even
Okay.
though corporations themselves don't have a conscience, the people who make the decisions on behalf of the organizations do, which then can kind of reflect what the corporation itself stands for. And sometimes this is a bit of a stretch taking that approach, but organizations can be sued, right? Not the people in them, but organizations can be. So
Right.
even though they're not a human of themselves, they're treated as an entity. And I think being an entity, they have a mission, they have a vision, they have value statements, and they should wrap this up and say, well, this is kind of where we stand on ethics. And of course, it's so easy, and this goes into the facade, I guess, of organizations can write whatever they want. It's not that hard to hire
Sure.
somebody who specializes in public relations and to write something, but are they following through? And that's this concept of what we call decoupling or washing, or symbolism versus substantiveness. Is what the corporation or the organization saying actually what they're doing, especially in terms of ethics? So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I will say I just take somewhat of a unique research approach to say, the people in the organizations are the ones making the decisions, and the decisions that they make are going to be reflective of what people perceive this organization standing for.
And the next step of that is you are not off the hook. And
Yeah.
I mean that, because it can be, this is the culture that this company for 150 years has been in a part of. Yet if you're running it today, or you're a
Right.
part of the management of
Yep.
it today, then it's on you. It may,
Yes.
if you look at it and go, we should never have done that 150 years ago,
Yep.
you're the only way that
Mm-hmm.
changes. It is that entity itself. And you're right. We've given it legal rights. We've given corporations legal rights of speech
Right.
in Supreme Court decisions. So we have done things that I look at and sort of wonder how we could ever get there. But
Mm-hmm.
that still doesn't change the reality that it's the people in it that are that are in the sites have to do the thing, because the corporation itself does not evolve without the people nudging it and
Yeah.
moving it, right?
Absolutely. And that's the thing too, that when organizations engage in wrongdoing, oftentimes they will turn over their leader as a sign of good faith. They're like, well, this is the person who is in charge. We're getting rid of them. Let's bring someone new in.
Right.
And that's a more accommodative response. So typically, when some of my research and part of my dissertation was on organizations' responses after crises, and research has said that there's so many different ways companies can respond, but um, in a nutshell, these responses can range on a continuum from defensive to accommodating,
Right.
where defensive is kind of you either don't say anything or you defend your actions, and then slowly it progresses to a full out apology. And doing this concept of firing the leader, as you say, because it's easy to put blame on somebody else, that is somewhat in the middle, right? Because
Right.
is the company taking responsibility, or are they just putting the blame on somebody and then kicking them out and inviting somebody new to take over? And when somebody new takes over, they have the spotlight on them. You have a short amount of time to show the organization, and depending on if you're private or public, your external audience,
Sure.
what you stand for and where you're going to take this company.
Yeah, well, and I think that your cautionary tale from before, which was the CFO who
Yeah.
did something because they were asked to do it, knew they shouldn't do it, left later, but still wound up having to do time,
Mm-hmm.
is a good one, because we are all actors, and that stuff is on all the levels we've talked about super important.
Yes,
Okay, quickly on the international front, because it really is different.
it is.
There are ethics and business ethics that are wildly different in some places. So
Mm-hmm.
ranging all the way from, do you bribe someone? Because that's what everybody does here,
Yeah.
down to smaller things, which just, how do we treat our people? Um, when you're rubber on the road, when you're out there running your business and you encounter those, I know it's easier to say you just don't do it, but if you want to get into that market and everyone's doing it, what in all that research that you've done are some
Yeah.
things you can try to have a third way? Tony Blair's old third way.
Absolutely. Find that option C in there. For me, it's actually again more from my personal observation. So I have been extremely blessed to travel, I believe, to 19 countries at this
Mm-hmm.
point. And with that, a lot of it came through schooling. And I remember one of my first international trips was to a country in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was there, they have a very strict law that you cannot take pictures of bridges. You can't. Why? Because the country struggles economically. And if somebody was to destroy a bridge, they would not have the financial means very quickly to rebuild. So
Sure.
they had this caution of, if people don't take pictures, it's going to be harder for them to damage our bridges. So we cross a bridge, and lo and behold, somebody in our van takes a picture of that bridge. And how do they know if you take a picture? Because constantly they have two armed guards at both sides of the bridge monitoring, is anybody taking a picture?
Yeah.
And we were pulled over, and they said, we saw you take a picture. And in that moment, the phone was taken. It wasn't, you didn't have, like, it was taken.
Sure.
And we thought, well, what happens now? And in that country, the norm with the law enforcement was bribery. So what you just said was bribery. So it was, hey, if you want your phone back, give me X amount of money. And they did. And the person said, here's the money, which was way more than the equivalent in the US currency. And he said, okay, delete the photos. So this individual deleted the photos, and we went on our day. And to me, I was like, wow, I've never seen somebody bribe law enforcement before. Like, this is what's happening. And they said that's just how it's done, because money is so, the economy is so different in different countries, that certain things
Right.
can occur and certain things don't. And if that's occurring just with somebody taking a picture on a bridge, what's occurring behind the scenes where these large corporations are operating, especially in capital cities, or in the capital city? So I can't necessarily speak to that because I haven't had that experience, and I really hope I don't.
Yeah.
But I think, to me, that third
Yeah.
option is, again, be proactive. Like, I really, one of my biggest blessings is being able to travel. I think experiencing new cultures and new people is awesome. However, I really advocate, if you are an entrepreneur, if you are an employee about to work abroad for a company, if you are a CEO, know where you're going. Know their, of course, you're going to have to know their economics, but there's a framework called the CAGE framework that asks you to, hey, before you go, before you do business, before you expand your business, understand CAGE. So understand the culture. You can use the Hofstede model to do that. You understand the administration. you understand the geographical distance and the trade regulations, and then the economy. I think the last two are more objective. Administrative and political is a little bit objective too, but
Hmm.
that cultural, you really have to try to understand the culture before you go to a new country. Because again, when you're there, when you're thousands of miles away from your home country, when you're thousands of miles away from the business that you started, and you are face to face, very proximate with individuals, you have to understand how you can and should appropriately handle that. So no, I think you touched on a really important topic that a lot of people might not understand. So my best advice is, before you get into business in another country, which I advocate for, know who is over there and how they operate on many different dimensions. And how do you do that? Well, you do your research, but also go travel. I took 4 years of Spanish, and I think I learned more in 2 weeks that I studied abroad in Ecuador than I did
Always,
in those 4 years of classes. So
always. Yeah.
go into the deep end.
Just jump right on in. I would add to that you'll, very similar to what we said before, you won't know till you're there.
Yeah.
So I think you can do the cage analysis, which I think is terrific
Hmm.
to get you thinking of those things before. When you get there, you may have an understanding, but you're going to find yourself similar to what we said we should say to students and we should say to ourselves, which is, it's going to come. There's going to
Yeah.
come the time when it's going to be different, and different enough that you're not comfortable with it. And you have to lay those lines down. I mean, we did that in a country that I won't mention, very far
Yeah.
away, that was challenging. And I had the decision as the CEO. They
Hmm.
came and said, well, this is what we're being asked. And I said, well, you're just going to have to tell them we don't do that.
Right.
And if that means we're not doing that deal or that business, then we're not doing that deal or that business, because it's just not worth it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, at the end of the day, it's not. And this
Yeah.
brand that we created 24 years ago is worldwide, and it's the gold standard, because that's the decision-making process we
Yeah.
went through over, and over again. I will tell
Yeah.
you one funny international story. It's just when they tried to sell Nova, the car,
Yeah.
into South America, it was a disaster, because you speak Spanish.
A
It
little bit.
Nova means won't go. They were
Yeah,
trying to sell a
exactly.
car in to people that was saying, yeah, this is the thing that won't go. I just love that little bit.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. I know how crazy it always is, and it's great to have your time. So I know that we end with a suggestion to people to how
Yeah.
to curate information, because the world
Yes.
bombards us every day, and we're looking for better ways. So something you found along the way
Yeah.
that helps you organize, find good information.
So I think you're going to enjoy my recommendations. I have both formal and informal.
Ooh, good.
So in informal, I have movie suggestions, because
Yay.
recently a lot of movies have been made, and obviously they're not 100% true, but they're based on true stories
Yes.
of companies that have engaged in these ethical wrongdoings. And I think that if you don't necessarily have a ton of time to do a lot of research, but you do have time to, maybe spend some quality time with your loved one or a friend, and you're like, hey, let's watch this movie, this might get those wheels turning and might spark some interest. And I
Ooh,
have them on the personal, the company, and the societal level that we
this is
talked about.
great. Yay. All
So,
right. Let us
so
know.
personally, there's the movie called Passengers. So it
Okay.
has Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence. It was released in 2016. Not really involved in a company, but more so it talks about a ethical internal dilemma where the individual Chris Pratt has to make a decision, and it really puts the viewer or the audience member in line with, what would I do? So I think that's a good thing, that if you have never really been in that ethical decision, just kind of watch that. A
Okay.
similar one is also called Boiler Room. So that
Oh,
was released in 2000, and that has Giovanni Ribisi in it, Vin Diesel, and Ben Affleck. And that is an individual in an organizational situation where there's all these norms and this individual, the main actor, is kind of questioning them and is like, wow, do I continue to do this to make my money and stay in this corporation, or do I exit? Then on the firm level, there's Dark Waters, which I highly recommend. That is about DuPont and their ethical scandal with
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
polluting local waters in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And that has Mark Ruffalo and was released in 2019. They also have Deepwater Horizon, which a lot of people, especially where we're geographically located, are familiar with,
Yeah.
which talks about the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And that has Mark Wahlberg, and it was released in 2016. You also have The Wolf of Wall Street with Leonardo DiCaprio that talks about the
Classic.
unethics at the top. A little bit
Classic.
more of a humorous
Yeah.
film
Oh, it's
with the
great.
true
Yeah, yeah.
story, but still based on a true story. And then the one that most people probably know that's a little bit more societal is The Big Short, right? So all
Yeah.
of these companies were engaging in this type of practice, and it was revealed in later on, but it became a norm. It's like, well, everybody's doing it, right? So why not us?
Yes.
So those are my informal recommendations that if you just kind of want to get a peek behind the curtain and you have some time to watch those. The more
First
formal
of all, I
is,
know you're going to go into the formal, but I love the fact that you gave us movies to watch. That's the
yeah.
best homework ever. Will you be my professor? That's great. I am in. I love that.
My ethics professor played The Boiler Room for us,
Oh,
and I
cool.
remember watching it in class, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. And it really just got my wheels turning because it it puts you in a place where you're just like, what would I do, right? And I think that if
Yeah.
like we talked about, jump in the deep end, right? Now obviously I hope nobody is ever in an ethical dilemma, but if this is a good simulation for that, like put yourself in a movie and try to experience it.
But you and I both know everyone in this audience, everyone in every audience is going to be in an ethical dilemma
Yes,
in their life
at
more
some
than
point.
once. Yeah.
And then for more formal stuff, I recommend two databases
Okay.
because there's, as a strategic management scholar, there's a lot of databases available that you can download certain data. I've always been somebody that when I've used certain databases, they are rating what companies do. So there's
Mm.
almost a filter. It's the company's actions, the filter, and then you get information. So I really try to go as close to the direct information as I can. So
Right.
I always advocate for audience members to look at press releases from the company. What came from the company's mouth? What did they sign off on? And then also view how it was talked about in the media. So two of the databases that I have used for research are Factiva and LexisNexis. And with Factiva, you can log in if you have an account or at a university with an account, and you can filter for certain verbiage that would lead you to press releases or media articles that discusses your company in wrongdoing situations or your company in good doing situations, such as their corporate social responsibility initiatives. And for me, what's better than it coming from the horse's mouth, right? Like obviously we want to understand what other people are saying about it as well, but I'm more so interested in what is the firm saying.
Sure. Okay. Well, those are great, great resources. Both of those are behind paywalls, I think, right?
They
So
are.
you need to have sort of a way to get at those, but find somebody who does, or find a way to get to them, because LexisNexis continues to be a great resource too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can always, so for companies that are publicly traded, their press releases are public and you can go into just the website. So for example, say that you're doing research on BP, you can Google BP press releases and it will take you to their media
Yeah.
center that has their press releases through a certain date.
Well, I have just had three more things come into my mind that I want to talk to you about that we're not going to get a chance to
Yeah.
talk about, but that's the way every good conversation should end. So, Alanna Hirshman, thank you so much. Dr. Alanna Hirshman,
Oh,
thank you
thank you.
so much for joining us today, and we'll have you back. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right,
Thank
everybody.
you.
See you next time.
Bye.